Welcome back to State of the Race. In his opening move as Speaker of the House, Republican Mike Johnson paired emergency aid to Israel with a hardline Republican priority, earning a veto threat from the White House and setting up a showdown with the Democratic Senate. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer called the bill a joke.
The hypocrisy here is that by cutting funding to go after tax cheats, he will actually explode the deficit by billions and billions of dollars. What a joke. The Senate will not be considering this deeply flawed proposal from the House GOP. And instead, we will work together on our own bipartisan emergency aid package that includes aid to Israel, Ukraine, competition with the Chinese government, and humanitarian aid for Gaza.
All right, let's bring in our panel now. Farnoosh Amiri is back with us. Matt Mowers, former senior advisor in the Trump administration, and Karen Finney, a CNN political commentator and former senior spokesperson for Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign. Thank you all for being here. Matt, this move by Mike Johnson is something that has angered, according to our reporting and sources I've talked to, has angered conservative Jewish groups, of which there are several that are, typically very influential with the Republican Party. I talked yesterday to Dan Goldman. Now, he's a Democrat, but he is very involved in Israel issues. And I asked him about this. Take a look what he had to say. Have you heard any rumblings or personal discussions from conservative pro-Israel groups such as AIPAC about their frustration with the speaker and his move here?
Yes, I think privately AIPAC is upset because AIPAC realizes that this is a bad long-term precedent. It is bad to condition aid to Israel on anything.
It is bad to condition aid to Israel on anything. I mean, honestly, that's why I was surprised about what Mike Johnson did. I mean, as someone who knows all these Republican figures on Capitol Hill, I mean, why do you think he did this? Do you think it was a mistake?
Sure. I mean, I think if you were to get to the heart of hearts of Mike Johnson, really ask him in an unscripted moment, he's not looking to do this either. What he's doing is reflecting the reality of the politics in his conference, though. You have some folks who are true believers, people like Chip Roy from Texas, for example, who don't believe you should have any new spending, regardless of how, good and necessary and needed it is, if it doesn't have an offset. So there is that ideological element there. You also have the fact that he knows that he could not get right now a majority of the conference likely to support funding for both Ukraine, Israel, and a whole host of other issues, even if it has some of that border funding the Senate's talking about. So he's using this as an opening salvo in negotiations with both the White House, with Chuck Schumer, as well as, by the way, Republicans in the Senate.
So two things on that. Number one, it shows he is as locked in as Kevin McCarthy is to the politics of his conference, right? And that is
More
going
so,
to, that does not exactly bode well as we head towards a fiscal cliff. Second of all, with the news that the Wagner Group is going to supply weapons to Hezbollah, it is also incredibly reckless and dangerous to our national security to say we're going to cut out Ukraine to aid, also cruel, cutting out humanitarian aid to Gaza, but cutting out the aid to Ukraine means we're not standing up to Putin. And Putin is already showing us he is willing to play games in the Middle East, and that impacts our national security. So the lack of understanding of sort of that chess game is very disturbing.
So there was a Democratic congressman who actually crossed party lines. He voted for the speaker's package. Basically, he said, look, they're trying to lay a political trap for us. I'm not going to play. He's a strong supporter of Israel. Jared Moskowitz, here's how he talked about this. And again, he voted with Speaker Johnson to push this bill forward. But here's what he had to say about what's going on here.
What Mike Johnson has done here in his first week of being speakers is quite being honest, it's shown terrible leadership. Right now, the world is in crisis. As someone who's a man of faith, a man of the Bible, to put the Holy Land in jeopardy like this, I think was a total miscalculation. I'm sure it'll make a great mailer. I'm sure the NRCC is super stoked, but I think it's disappointing.
I mean, Farnoosh, there's a lot there. He's basically saying, cool, I gave, this up, and that Republicans are looking at this strictly from a political perspective. But that argument, looking at Mike Johnson as a man of faith, a man of the Bible. I mean, if anything, that piece of it actually surprised me about what the speaker decided to do in terms of, I mean, we can talk about Ukraine in a minute, but in terms of strictly Israel, conditioning aid to Israel on anything is not something typically that evangelical Christians would be interested in.
I mean, if you take a step back and you look at it beyond Israel, I mean, the House of Representatives and Congress in general has not made supplemental requests pay-fors. They've never required pay-fors in years. It's just not a thing. When the White House sends an emergency request, the House and the Senate take it up. Obviously, they have different versions of what they want that to be, but for him to even, regardless of it being Israel aid, to include a pay-for this is stunning on its own. But in addition to that, I mean, what Moskowitz and many other, I mean, I spoke to Brad Schneider, who's a very pro-Israel Democrat, who told me this was one of the hardest votes he had to vote against. And AIPAC was planning on scoring the vote for a lot of these Jewish Democrats and Democrats in general, and they decided to hold back just because they saw the position that they were putting these folks in who have been loyal to Israel, who have never voted against any single dollar bill, Democrats more than Republicans, in any funding bill. And this was just a really stunning move by Mike
Really
Johnson.
telling,
That
really
is very
telling. Yeah.
I was just going to say, as Chuck Schumer also pointed out, the reality of this is it actually increases the deficit because you're by taking the money back from the IRS, you're actually reducing revenues to the United States. So it's not even what they say. They're not doing what they say they're doing. They're actually increasing the deficit, protecting rich people, and endangering our national security, and endangering aid to Israel. So good job.
I will say I was on with a Republican who said basically well, I don't believe what the CBO has to say, because to your point, the CBO did say that this actually will make the spending crisis worse. Matt, we've talked a lot, obviously, right now about the pressures inside the Republican Party about this. However, there are increasing pressures on Democrats as well. And there are 13 senators, I'd like to put them up on the screen, who wrote a letter calling for a short-term cessation of hostilities in Gaza. This is a wide range of Democrats, okay, from, Peter Welch of Vermont, from Tammy Baldwin is a progressive who's on this letter, but then you have Mark Warner from Virginia, who is not somebody who typically is on, the left of the Democratic caucus in the Senate. What message does this send to the Biden administration?
Well, look, it shows that there's going to be mixed messages coming out of both parties right now around Israel. Right? I mean, you've got Joe Biden out there, President Biden, you got Antony Blinken literally in Israel right now, who's saying that Israel has every right to respond any way they need to the attacks that the terrorist attacks that they just went through a few weeks ago. And now you have a significant number of Democratic senators saying, wait a minute, maybe you shouldn't go in unrestricted. Maybe we should actually be telling you how to run this war that you need to go in. That's sending mixed messages too. It's part of the reason why really you need presidential leadership, not just when he's traveling abroad, where I think President Biden has been unequivocal in his support for Israel, but also back here in Washington, D.C. He needs to bring leaders to the table together. He should have them all in the Oval Office, and he should actually get something done that can be bipartisan, can be nearly unanimous, so that we can show a message of unity coming out of the United States right now to supporting Israel. Talking about the aid package.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just point out that yesterday the president did actually start to say in our own reporting, right, that they believe this position is increasingly untenable, and that part of the message Antony Blinken would be delivering is it's weeks, not months before
you're running out of time.
You're running out of time. So to your point, I think they are trying to balance those messages, and who knows what they're also saying privately.
Right. Well, and that's always the rub. All right.
Yeah.
We got a lot more to talk about here today, because up next, voters are voting the first Tuesday in November, coming up fast early next week. What we're going to learn about the political landscape here coming up next.